My name is Vernor Vinge, and I used to teach mathematics and computer science. And going back to high school, I've been a science fiction writer, and now I write science fiction full time.
And so you were a professor at San Diego State.
San Diego State University.
Yeah. What did you teach math at San Diego State?
My PhD is in math, and that's what they hired me for. But this was so long ago that there were hardly even such an idea as a PhD in computer science. So basically, I was allowed to teach computer science courses, and I gradually learned more and more of it. So the last 10 or 15 years of my teaching career was almost entirely computer science. The first 5 or 10 years it was, mostly math.
So, how does one go from math to science fiction?
Oh, well, in my case, as a child, I always wanted to be a great scientist, and I gradually realized that was unlikely. But I still was interested in science. In particular, I thought that, and I still think that math is a toolbox. If you're interested in science, but you don't know quite what you want to do in science, to learn math, because it works. It's important in almost all sciences. And at the same time, as a child, I was very interested in what the science could do, and this is the early 1950s, very irritated by the fact that most stories that I could find, the world was the same at the end of the story as at the beginning of the story. And so I gradually found that occasionally I'd find a story where the world was different at the end of the story. And I learned that really happened that was generally associated with stories that were called science fiction. So I zoomed in on the notion of science fiction, and I was slow to learn to read. And my parents told me that actually the first whole book that I was able to read was a science fiction book, and actually not a very easy start. Between Planets by Robert Heinlein, which is not a really deep and complex book, but it's actually not the first book you'd expect a person to read. So that's I can't claim to be a prodigy, because I was so old at that point that they were beginning to worry about this kid, whether he was ever going to read. But so I was always interested in science fiction. I was always interested in science, and I thought that math was the high road to getting a commanding position in science.
So, the singularity, that sounds like a math term, but it's not. It's a science fiction term.
Actually, it's a science and mathematics term borrowed by a science fiction.
Can you explain what the singularity is and kind of how you came to the whole idea in the first place?
My notion of the technological singularity is the fact that I think it's likely that in the fairly near future that we humans, using technology, will either create or become something that's superhumanly intelligent. And that is, if that were to happen, it would be an immense change in the rules. And I think it's pretty clear that if it happened, it would be a different type of technological advance than we have seen in the past. I mean, we have television, we have satellites, and going back, we have printing presses and the invention of fire. None of that actually is, to me, qualitatively as serious a change as the rise of superhuman intelligence. And the analogy that I use is that you can explain fire and television and all of those things to people from before those inventions, and they would understand what you were talking about. They might not believe what you said, and they'd also understand what you claimed the consequences would be. You could not undertake such an explanation with a goldfish, and that is what it would take to understand what the situation would be like after the singularity, because the major players are superhumanly intelligent. Now, the reason why singularity is, I think, a very appropriate word for that is singularity is a term that's been in science and math for a long time. And in math, it's a place where your mathematical description is not appropriate. In physics, it's where you have a model for what's going on, and it's a place where the model breaks and you need some other sort of model. So a supersonic shock wave is a singularity as far as the simple equations for motion. The other thing that is appropriate about using the word singularity as a metaphor that I'm using in intelligence is the singularities in general relativity theory. The famous one is the black hole. That is surrounding a type of singularity in Einstein's equations. And that has the property that there's only one or two things that you can learn about what's inside a black hole. You can tell how massive a black hole is. There's one or two other things you can tell about what's going on inside. But overall, the black hole is inaccessible. And as a metaphor, that fits very well with the inaccessibility that I would see in this intelligence singularity that I'm talking about.